The Cfa franc is the name of two currencies used in Africa which are guaranteed by the French treasury. The two Cfa franc currencies are the West African Cfa franc and the Central African Cfa franc. Although theoretically separate, the two Cfa franc currencies are effectively interchangeable. Both Cfa francs currently have a fixed exchange rate to the euro. 100 Cfa francs equals 1 former French franc equals 0.152449 euro, or 1 euro equals 655.957 Cfa francs exactly. Although Central African Cfa francs and West African Cfa francs have always been at parity and have therefore always had the same monetary value against other currencies, they are in principle separate currencies. They could theoretically have different values from any moment if one of the two CFA monetary authorities, or France, decided it. Therefore, West African CFA coins and banknotes are theoretically not accepted in countries using Central African CFA francs, and vice versa. However, in practice, the permanent parity of the two Cfa franc currencies is widely assumed. Usage: Cfa francs are used in 14 countries, 12 formerly French-ruled nations in West and Central Africa, as well as in Guinea-Bissau and in Equatorial Guinea. These 14 countries have a combined population of 147.5 million people, and a combined GDP of $166.6 billion. The ISO currency codes are XAF for the Central African Cfa franc and XOF for the West African Cfa franc. Criticism: the currency has been criticized for making economic planning for the developing countries of French West Africa all but impossible since the CFA's value is pegged to the euro. Others disagree and argue that the CFA helps stabilize the national currencies of franc zone member countries and greatly facilitates the flow of exports and imports between France and the member countries. The European Union's own assessment of the CFA's link to the euro, carried out in 2008, noted that benefits from economic integration within each of the two monetary unions of the Cfa franc zone, and even more so between them, remained remarkably low, but that the peg to the French franc and, since 1999, to the euro's exchange rate anchor is usually found to have had favorable effects in the region in terms of macroeconomic stability. Name: between 1945 and 1958, CFA stood for Colonies Françaises d'Afrique, then for Communauté Française d'Afrique. Between 1958 and the independence of these African countries at the beginning of the 1960s. Since independence, CFA is taken to mean Communauté Financière Africaine, but in actual use the term can have two meanings. History: creation: the Cfa franc was created on the 26th of December 1945, along with the CFP franc. The reason for the creation was the weakness of the French franc immediately after World War II, when France ratified the Bretton Woods Agreement in December 1945. The French franc was devalued in order to set a fixed exchange rate with the US dollar. New currencies were created in the French colonies to spare them the strong devaluation, thereby facilitating exports to France. French officials presented the decision as an act of generosity. René Pleven, the French Minister of Finance, was quoted as saying, "In a show of her generosity and selflessness, metropolitan France, wishing not to impose on her faraway daughters the consequences of her own poverty, is setting different exchange rates for the currency." Exchange rate: the Cfa franc was created with a fixed exchange rate versus the French franc. This exchange rate was changed only twice, in 1948 and in 1994. Exchange rate: the 26th of December 1945 to the 16th of October 1948. 1 CFA franc equals 1 French franc and 70 centimes. This 70 French centime premium is the consequence of the creation of the Cfa franc, which spared the French African colonies the devaluation of December 1945. The 17th of October 1948 to the 31st of December 1959. 1 CFA franc equals 2 French francs. The 1st of January 1960 to the 11th of January 1994. 1 CFA franc equals 2 French centimes. The 12th of January 1994 to the 31st of December 1998. 1 CFA franc equals 1 French centime. The 1st of January 1999 onwards, 100 CFA franc equals €0.152449. 1 euro equals 655.957 CFA franc. The 1960 and 1999 events were merely changes in the currency in use in France. The relative value of the Cfa franc versus the French franc euro changed only in 1948 and 1994. The value of the Cfa franc has been widely criticized as being too high, which many economists believe favors the urban elite of the African countries, who can buy imported manufactured goods cheaply at the expense of farmers who cannot easily export agricultural products. The devaluation of 1994 was an attempt to reduce these imbalances. Changes in countries using the franc. Over time, the number of countries and territories using the Cfa franc has changed as some countries began introducing their own separate currencies. A couple of nations in West Africa have also chosen to adopt the Cfa franc since its introduction, despite the fact that they were never French colonies. 1960, Guinea leaves and begins issuing Guinean francs. 1962, Mali leaves and begins issuing Malian francs. 1973, Madagascar leaves and begins issuing its own francs, the Malagasy franc, which ran concurrently with the Malagasy Ariary. 1973, Mauritania leaves, replacing the franc with the Mauritanian Ouïa. 1974, St. Pierre and Miquelon leaves for French franc. 1975, Acute Union leaves for French franc. 1976, Mayotte leaves for French franc. 1984, Mali rejoins. 1985, Equatorial Guinea joins. 1997, Guinea-Bissau joins European Monetary Union. In 1998, in anticipation of economic and monetary union of the European Union, the Council of the European Union addressed the monetary agreements France has with the CFA zone and Comoros and ruled that the agreements are unlikely to have any material effect on the monetary and exchange rate policy of the Eurozone. In the present forms and states of implementation, the agreements are unlikely to present any obstacle to a smooth functioning of economic and monetary union. Nothing in the agreements can be construed as implying an obligation for the European Central Bank or any national central bank to support the convertibility of the CFA and Comorian francs. Modifications to the existing agreements will not lead to any obligations for the European Central or any national central bank. The French Treasury will guarantee the free convertibility at a fixed parity between the euro and the CFA and Comorian francs. The competent French authorities shall keep the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the Economic and Financial Committee informed about the implementation of the agreements and inform the committee prior to changes of the parity between the euro and the CFA and Comorian francs. Any change to the nature or scope of the agreements would require Council approval on the basis of a Commission recommendation and ECB consultation. Institutions. Strictly speaking, there are actually two different currencies called the Cfa franc, the West African Cfa franc, and the Central Africa Cfa franc. They are distinguished in French by the meaning of the abbreviation CFA. These two CFA francs have the same exchange rate with the euro, and they are both guaranteed by the French Treasury. But the West African Cfa franc cannot be used in Central African countries, and the Central Africa Cfa franc cannot be used in West African countries. The West African Cfa franc is just known in French as the franc CFA, where CFA stands for Communauté Financière d'Afrique, Communauté Financière Africaine. It is issued by the BCEAO, located in Dakar, Senegal, for the 8 countries of the UEMOA: Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo. These 8 countries have a combined population of 102.5 million people, and a combined GDP of $78.4 billion. Central African. The Central Africa Cfa franc is known in French as the franc CFA, where CFA stands for Coopération Financière en Afrique Centrale. It is issued by the BEAC, located in Yaoundé, Cameroon, for the 6 countries of the CEMAC: Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon. These 6 countries have a combined population of 45.0 million people, and a combined GDP of $88.2 billion. In 1975, Central African CFA banknotes were issued with an obverse unique to each participating country, and common reverse, in a fashion similar to euro coins. Equatorial Guinea, the only former Spanish colony in the zone, adopted the CFA in 1984. Gallery.